The first snow fell the day the sold sign went up. It wasn't the gentle kind that dusts the fields in sugar, but a hard, early winter that iced the windows shut. I knew then it wasn't just the land she was trying to freeze out. My name is May, and for 82 years, my world has been measured by the creak of this porch swing and the view from this kitchen window. The farm isn't just soil and timber. It's the fingerprint of my life, every fence post and furrow a memory of my Harold. My daughter Clara always saw it as a burden. I never understood the depth of that resentment until I returned from a month at my sister's, recovering from a bad fall, to find my legacy already signed away to a stranger. The car door closed behind me with a sound like a final seal. The air was different. Not just the cold. I'd known 60 winters on this land. This was a silence that had settled in my absence. A holding of breath. And then I saw it. A slash of red at the end of the lane, where the old oak's shadow used to fall. A sold sign, staked into the frozen earth like a flag claiming a conquered kingdom. I stood there, my suitcase heavy in my hand. The month I'd spent at my sister's recovering from the fall that shattered my hip, felt like a dream. This was the awakening. The wind picked up, biting through my coat, but I barely felt it. My eyes were fixed on that red. It was too bright. Too violent against the gentle gray of the sky and the white of the first real snow. Harold and I planted that lilac bush by the lane post the spring we were married. Now this metal stranger stood in its place. I made myself walk to the house. My steps were slow, my body still protesting, but my heart was pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. The porch steps groaned the same welcome they always had, but it felt like a warning now. The key turned in the lock. I pushed the door open. The house was cold. Not just empty cold. It was a deep, settled chill that told me the furnace had been set low for days. I stood in the hallway listening. No tick from the grandfather clock. It had stopped. The only sound was the wind whistling through a loose pane in the kitchen window, a pane Harold had always meant to fix. I drifted from room to room, my fingers trailing over the familiar furniture. Everything was in its place, yet nothing felt the same. It was a museum of a life that was being closed down. In the kitchen the counters were bare. No fruit in the bowl. No cookie tin on the shelf. I opened the pantry. A single can of soup sat lonely on the vast empty shelf. A deliberate emptiness. A message. The back door opened. Footsteps. Clara came in, brushing snow from her shoulders. She was smiling, but it was a tight, thin line. "Mom, you're back." I was just checking the pipes. She didn't come to hug me. She stayed by the door, a stranger in my kitchen. "Clara," I said, my voice hoarse from the cold. "There's a sign. At the end of the lane." Her smile didn't waver. "I know. Isn't it a relief? It's all settled." She moved to the sink, filling the kettle, her back to me. She talked about my safety. The burden of the old house. The stairs were too much for me. She spoke of her own financial freedom, a weight lifted from her shoulders. She used words like practical and sensible. Each word was a smooth, polished stone, building a wall between us. I listened, watching the way her shoulders were set. So rigid. So sure. "When?" I asked, the single word hanging in the cold air. "The papers were signed last week. The developers were very eager." Developers. The word landed in my gut like a stone. She made tea. She placed a mug in front of me. The steam rose between us, a frail ghost. She didn't look at me. She looked at the empty pantry, at the stopped clock, anywhere but at my face. "You'll come stay with us in town," she said, a statement, not an offer. "It's for the best." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, but the chill was inside me now, seeping into my bones. This was my daughter. The little girl I'd taught to bake pies at this very counter. The one who'd chased fireflies in the field out back. And she had sold it all. Without a word. While I was weak in a way. She finished her tea in a few quick gulps. "I have to go. Mark's waiting in the car." She gave my shoulder a quick, awkward pat. A dismissal. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut. The house fell silent again, but this silence was different. It was heavy. It was the silence of betrayal, and it settled into the floors, the walls, into the very air I was trying to breathe. I sat at the table for a long time, until the weak winter light began to fade. The weight of it all pressed down on me. This house. This land. The memories of Harold, his presence still in every worn floorboard. All of it gone. Traded for my daughter's convenience. Finally, I pushed myself up. I had to do something, anything to feel grounded. I went to the pantry. I would make bread. The simple physical act of kneading dough would calm my mind. I reached for the big ceramic flour bin, the one with the blue rooster painted on the side. I lifted the heavy lid. The smell of wheat and thyme wafted out. I scooped my hand deep into the soft, cool flour, feeling for the bottom. My fingers, instead of touching smooth ceramic, brushed against waxed paper. Wrapped around something solid. My breath hitched. I carefully pulled it out, dusting the flour away. It was a thick, legal-sized envelope, yellowed with age. Harold's handwriting was on the front. For me. The heart of the place. With trembling hands I opened it. Inside was a single heavy sheet of paper. The master deed. For the farm. The original. Signed by Harold's father and then by us. I stared at it, my heart thumping a wild, confused rhythm. The house was cold. The pantry was bare. My daughter had sold my home. But if she had sold it, why was the deed to the land still here, hidden in the flour, safe in my hands? The wind began its low moan just as the light failed. It wasn't the friendly whistle of a passing gale, but a deep, constant howl that wrapped around the house like a fist. I lit the old hurricane lamp Harold kept for emergencies. Its warm, jumping flame threw long shadows that danced across the walls, making the familiar room feel ancient and unknown. The blizzard was here, locking me in with nothing but my thoughts. And the silence my daughter had left behind. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the snow whip past in horizontal sheets. It was a white wall, erasing the world beyond the glass. The fields, the barn, the lane with its red sign, all gone. There was a strange peace in it. No one could get in. And for now I didn't have to go out. The storm gave me a reprieve. A space to think. To understand what had been done. My eyes fell on the trunk. The old brass-bound C trunk that had been Harold's father's. Claire called it sentimental junk. To her it was just a box full of dusty papers and forgotten things. She never understood that a life is built in ledgers and letters, not just in grand gestures. I knelt, my bones protesting the cold floor. The latch was stiff, but it gave with a familiar metallic sigh. The smell of old paper and cedar bloomed in the air, a scent that was the very essence of Harold. I didn't know what I was looking for. Comfort perhaps. A whisper from the past to remind me who I was. I lifted out his old flannel shirts, still holding the faint, ghostly shape of his shoulders. Beneath them lay his life's work. Not the farm itself but the record of it. The careful, penciled chronicle of his days. His farm ledgers. I carried the heavy books to the kitchen table, setting them gently beside the flickering lamp. The first page was dated the spring we were married. His handwriting was so young, so full of hope and ambition. I traced the numbers with my finger. Payments for seed. Income from the first harvest. The entry for the oak tree we planted by the creek. I lost myself in the story of our life, page by page, year by year. It was a story of hard work and honest yields. Then about 5 years ago the story changed. The handwriting shifted. It became Clara's tight, efficient script. She'd taken over the books to help, she said. To modernize. At first it was just her hand. The numbers were the same. But then the numbers themselves began to change. I turned the pages slowly, the storm raging outside. Small, unexplained withdrawals at first. A few $100. Then 1,000. They were always marked miscellaneous or household. But I knew the cost of running this house. These amounts were different. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. I turned another page. Another. And then I saw it. A pattern. A terrible, damning pattern. A $5,000 withdrawal dated last March. I remembered that March. My son-in-law, Mark, had tried to start a landscaping business. It had failed within months. Another entry for $8,000 from the previous autumn. That was when he'd invested in that doomed franchise. The numbers lined up with his failures. Every single one of them. The withdrawals grew larger, more frequent, more desperate. They were draining the farm drop by drop, to prop up his crumbling dreams. The sale wasn't a sudden decision made for my well-being. It was the final, frantic act in a long-running play. They had been bleeding Harold's legacy dry for years. They had stolen from the land, from our sweat, from our future. And when there was almost nothing left to take, they decided to sell the corpse of it. To cover their tracks with one final, devastating payment. They weren't just selling a property. They were erasing him. erasing us. To hide their own shame. I closed the ledger. The worn green cover felt cold beneath my palm. The numbers told a story of desperation, a story of a secret financial panic I had been completely blind to. They showed me the why. But as the blizzard shook the very foundations of my home, I was left with a colder, more terrifying question. The numbers told me who had taken the money. But they didn't tell me who exactly my daughter had sold my home to. The world had turned to glass overnight. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a stillness so complete it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Every tree limb, every fence post, every blade of tall grass was encased in a perfect, shimmering casing of ice. The morning sun hit it all and set the whole farm ablaze with cold fire. It was beautiful. It was deadly. It was a warning. I stood at the kitchen window, warming my hands around a mug of tea, watching my breath make ghosts on the cold pane. The silence was different now. The howling wind was gone, replaced by this deep, frozen hush. A twig snapped somewhere in the woods, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the crystalline air. That's when I saw him. A dark figure, a stark silhouette against all that blinding white. A man. Walking my property line. He moved with a purpose that didn't belong here. This wasn't the slow, thoughtful pace of a farmer checking his fences. This was a measuring walk. A calculating walk. In his hand he held a large roll of paper, and my heart, which had been frozen in my chest for days, gave a single painful lurch. I knew what that was. I didn't need to see it to know. It was a blueprint. I pulled on my heavy boots and my late husband's old barn coat, the wool still carrying the faint, comforting scent of him. The cold hit my face like a slap as I opened the door. The snow crunched under my boots, a sound that usually brought me peace. Today it just sounded like breaking bones. I walked toward him, my steps slow and deliberate. He heard me coming and turned. He was young, with a clean, city-cut jaw and eyes that held no history of this land. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice calm, though my hands were clenched deep in my coat pockets. He gave me a polite, professional smile. "Morning, ma'am. Just doing a final survey." He unrolled the blueprint slightly. I saw sharp, black lines, boxes where my fields should be, streets named after trees that would be cut down to make room for them. "This is private property," I said, my gaze steady on his. "Oh, I know," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "My company just purchased it. We break ground on Whispering Pines Estates come spring." The name was so hollow, so manufactured. There were no pines left here to whisper. Harold and I had planted those oaks. I took a slow breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. "You purchased it from my daughter, Clara." It wasn't a question. But the moment I said her name, his face changed. The professional mask slipped just for a second. A flicker of confusion. Then something else. Pity. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice softer now. "I didn't deal with any Clara. The seller was Mark Evans. He had all the paperwork. Power of attorney, said he was acting on behalf of his elderly mother-in-law, who was unable to manage her own affairs." The world tilted. The glittering ice, the sharp blue sky, the man's face, it all swam for a moment. Power of attorney. My son-in-law, Mark. The one whose failed ventures were detailed in Harold's ledgers. The one who had never looked me in the eye without a calculation behind his own. I never signed such a paper. I would never have given that man control over a single spoon in my kitchen, let alone the land my husband's heart and soul were poured into. It was a forgery. A lie. A criminal lie. The betrayal was not just my daughter's silent complicity, her willingness to let this happen. It was a conspiracy. A plan hatched between husband and wife, sealed with a forgery. They hadn't just decided to sell my home. They had conspired to steal it. To fabricate a reality where I was a helpless, incompetent old woman, and they were the sensible ones cleaning up a mess. The first snow, the cold house, the empty pantry, it wasn't just neglect. It was a stage setting. It was evidence to support their lie. I looked past the young man, past his blueprint of destruction, to my frozen fields. The ice wasn't just on the trees anymore. It was in my veins. The cold I had felt since returning home had finally found its source. It wasn't winter. It was the chilling truth of what my own family was capable of. The man, uncomfortable with my silence, began to say something about contact information, about the timeline. I didn't hear him. I was already turning, already walking back toward the house, my footprints the only marks in the pristine, cruel snow. The freeze had only just begun. The first branch fell just after dusk. It wasn't the soft thud of snow, but the sharp, splintering crack of ice-laden wood giving way. Then another. And another. Like bones breaking all around the house. The lights flickered once, twice, held their breath with me and then died. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft glow of the stove clock, all the small modern heartbeats of the house fell silent. The only sound left was the relentless ping of freezing rain against the windows, building its glassy coffin around my home. I stood in the sudden, absolute dark. It was a blackness so complete it felt solid. I could feel the cold already beginning to seep in through the walls, reaching for me with invisible fingers. My first instinct was panic. A tight, fluttering fear in my chest. I was alone. I was old. The world had been stripped down to its most elemental state, dark, cold, and silent. I felt a profound vulnerability, the very feeling my daughter and her husband had counted on to make me compliant. But then something shifted. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the moonlight struggling through the icy glaze on the windows. It cast a weak, bluish light just enough to see by. I moved slowly to the kitchen drawer, my hands finding what they needed by memory. A book of matches. A single, thick beeswax candle Harold had always loved. I struck a match. The flare was blinding in the darkness. I touched it to the wick and a small, brave flame sprang to life. I set the candle on the kitchen table. Its light didn't fill the room, but it carved out a space. A circle of warmth and defiance against the overwhelming dark. The shadows it threw were long and dancing, but they were my shadows. In that quiet, illuminated circle, with the storm raging impotently outside, the fear began to recede. It was replaced by something else. A cold, clear certainty. They had left me in the dark. But I had my own light. I carried the candle with me to the bedroom. I knelt by the bed, the floorboards cold even through my wool skirt. I reached into the secret space Harold had built beneath the floor. A hiding place for important things, for dreams. My fingers brushed against the waxed paper envelope holding the true deed. And beside it the old cardboard box. I hadn't opened it in years. I brought it back to the kitchen table, to the heart of my small circle of light. I lifted the lid. The scent of old photographs and time rose to meet me. There we were. Harold and I, young and strong, standing in front of the barn we raised with our own hands. Our faces were smudged with dirt, but our smiles were brilliant. Another photo. The two of us planting the south field, him driving the tractor, me walking beside him. Another. Our hands clasped together on this very kitchen table, the wood still the same. These weren't just pictures. They were proof. Proof of a life built together. Proof of ownership that went deeper than any piece of paper. They had tried to erase him. But he was in the very grain of the wood, in the shape of the land, in the light of this candle. I looked from the determined young faces in the photographs to the forged deed, then to the dark, silent void beyond my candlelight. They thought the storm would isolate me, break me. But it had done the opposite. It had stripped everything away, all the noise and the hurt, until only the truth remained. I was not a helpless old woman. I was the keeper of this story. I was Harold's wife. I reached for the old rotary phone on the wall. It was dead, of course. But my cell phone, charged before the storm, had 1 bar of battery. A single, fleeting chance. I didn't scroll through contacts for a lawyer. I dialed a number I knew by heart. A number from a time when a man's word was his bond. It rang twice. A gruff, familiar voice answered. Judge Henderson. Walter, I said, my voice steady in the quiet. It's Mae. Harold's Mae. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost see him straightening in his chair. Mae. Are you all right? The power's out, I said simply. And it seems there's been a misunderstanding about the farm. Someone has presented a forged power of attorney. They're trying to sell Harold's land. Another pause, heavier this time. A forgery? He said, the word hanging in the air between us, laden with consequence. Yes, I said, my eyes on the photograph of Harold's proud, smiling face. I have the real deed. And I have the truth. But I need the word of a man who remembers what a handshake meant. I heard the rustle of paper on his end. The sound of purpose. Give me the names, Mae. And as I spoke them into the phone, the candle flame burned steady and bright. The world outside was still dark and frozen, the ice still clinging to every surface. But for the first time since I saw that red sign stabbed into my land, I could see the path forward with perfect crystalline clarity. It was a path lit by memory and it led straight through the storm. The morning of the meeting, the sun finally broke through. It was a weak winter sun, but it caught the melting ice on the branches and turned them to dripping diamonds. The house was quiet, clean, waiting. I had baked bread not for them but for the simple, honest smell of it. For the memory of 1,000 other mornings in this kitchen. The table was set not for a meal but for a reckoning. I had placed everything with quiet deliberation. The genuine deed, its paper creamy and thick with age, was the anchor. To its left, the forged power of attorney, a flimsy, cheap copy of a document that should have held trust. To its right, Harold's old ledgers, open to the pages that told the story of their theft. And in the center, the photograph of us, young and hopeful, building our future on this very land. Judge Henderson sat in Harold's old chair by the stove, a silent, formidable witness. He didn't need a robe here. His presence was enough. I heard the car long before I saw it. The crunch of tires on the gravel lane was an alien sound now. I stood at the sink, my back to the door, washing a single cup. I wanted them to see me like this first. The harmless, domestic old woman they expected. The one they thought they had defeated. The door opened without a knock. They still felt they had the right. "Mom, we're here. The truck for your things will be here in an hour." Clara's voice was brisk, already moving on. I heard Mark's heavier footsteps behind her. I turned slowly, drying my hands on my apron. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply looked at them. That's when they saw the judge. The air in the room changed. Clara's efficient posture faltered. Mark's confident smile froze, then melted away completely. Their eyes darted from the judge's stern face to the documents laid out on the table. The blueprint of their betrayal displayed in the open. "Walter," I said, my voice calm as the still morning outside. "My daughter Clara. And her husband, Mark." The judge gave a single, slow nod. He didn't speak. His silence was more powerful than any accusation. I gestured to the table. "I thought we should all be clear. Before any boxes are packed." Clara's face was pale. "Mom, what is this? What's going on?" I picked up the forged paper. "This," I said, holding it lightly between my thumb and forefinger as if it were something unclean. "Was this your idea, Mark? Or was it a collaboration?" Mark took a step forward, his face flushing. "Now see here, May. It's Mrs. Evans to you," I said, and my voice, though quiet, cut through the room like the winter air. "And you will not speak in my home again until you are spoken to." He recoiled as if struck. I turned my gaze to Clara. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the photograph. On her father's face. "The land is not sold," I said, laying the forgery back down. "It will not be sold. The deed is here. The true one. The one your father and I signed." I let the silence hang. I let them feel the weight of it, the weight of the judge's gaze, the weight of their own actions pressing down on them. "The money you took from the farm accounts," I continued, my hand resting on the open ledger. "That is a matter for another day. But this forgery, is a matter for today." Judge Henderson finally spoke. His voice was low, but it filled the room. "Presenting a forged instrument to a notary is a felony. I've already spoken with the district attorney. He's interested." I watched the ice in their veins crack. I saw it in the way Clara's hand flew to her mouth. In the way Mark's shoulders slumped. All the bluster had gone out of him. There were no tears. No dramatic pleas. Just the slow, sickening realization of being caught. Of being seen for exactly who they were. "You will leave this property now," I said, my voice soft but final. "You will not return unless I invite you. The land, this house, the memories in these walls. They are mine. They were always mine. And I am not done with them yet." They left without another word. Clara wouldn't look at me. She walked out, a stranger in a coat I'd given her for Christmas, her head bowed in shame. Mark followed, a broken man, his schemes lying in ruins around him. I stood at the window and watched their car move slowly down the lane, past the spot where the red sign had been. I had pulled it out of the ground myself at dawn. The land was saved. The house was silent again, but this time the silence was my own. It was the silence of truth, hard-won and bittersweet. I had saved the farm from the bulldozers. A victory that should have tasted of triumph. But as I watched their car disappear, becoming a small dark speck and then nothing at all, I was left with a hollowness no victory could fill. I had won back my home, my legacy, my truth. But I wondered if I could ever save the daughter I once knew from the deep, permanent cold that had taken root in her heart.